Hey everybody, and welcome to the PC Gamer Show. My name is Tom Marks, back from a week off. I real quickly want to just address our podcast listeners. I apologize, the show didn't get posted last week. I did just post it earlier today, though, so now you get a double feature week. You get two shows in one. So thank you for listening, and sorry for that accidental mishap there. With me today on the show, though, is our very own Wes Fenlon. How you doing, Wes?
Hello. Hey, so who do we blame for that last week? Was that James?
It was James.
So the long streak of Blame Tom 2016?
Yes, hashtag blame James.
Finally over. Blame James.
Not my fault, finally. Also joining us over the magic of a webcam is Mr. Jared Walton. How you doing, Jared?
Doing good, Tom. Great to be here.
We're gonna be talking about a lot of different things today. First and foremost, I'll be talking about Gears of War 4. I got to play it up at the Coalition, Microsoft studio that's making the game, and also made the Ultimate Edition. Although
in Canada,
yeah, in Vancouver. And then we'll also be doing what I have cleverly, not cleverly named the State of the GPUnion. Because we have
soft golf clap for that one.
Golf clap and a hit the mic. I think that's exactly the right reaction, both of those things.
Slightly messy.
But we'll be talking about, we haven't talked about kind of like hardcore hardware stuff. I wanted to say hard as many times as I could in that sentence.
Hardcore.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a while, and a lot has changed with GPUs. We had a potential rumor leak of the 1080 Ti. We also had the RX 470 come out. It's just been a good time to talk about hardware, so we got Jared on to talk in depth about that sort of stuff. We'll also be just taking a look kind of forward. You know, we are now through what is known as like the summer lull of games, I think, and we're, as we approach October, getting into the holiday season of huge releases and lots of them coming out. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to look forward, maybe discuss some of the bigger ones and what we're looking forward to or not.
You know, there's really no such thing as a lull on the, at least on the PC anymore.
Yeah, not anymore.
There still is that obvious summer gap for AAA games.
Yeah.
You know, like the AAA stuff between July and September is, you know, kind of a trickle. But, you know, you've been doing this column on the site for the past 2 months or so, 6 weeks maybe, of like, here are 5 games you might have missed from Steam this week. You know, that stuff that just totally flies under the radar. And usually there are at least 5 games that look interesting. And that's just the ones that we've like paid no attention to.
Yeah, I think this is actually our 10th week doing it.
Nice, 10 weeks. Yeah, time flies.
It does, definitely. But of course, we're going to be taking your questions from Twitch chat at the end of the show. So if we don't touch on something for hardware or a game you want to talk about that's coming up or anything like that, we can answer those questions at the end. So stick around for that. But let's start the show the way we usually do, which is talking about what we've been playing lately. Wes, let's start with you. What do you got going on, man?
That's a good question that somehow I was unprepared for, even though we do this every week. What have I been playing lately? Not a whole lot. So Lucas from Games Radar, former PC Gamer intern from way back, Lucas and I have been playing Earth Defense Force 4.1, The Shadow of New Despair, I believe is the full title of that game. It's this kind of cult favorite, low budget Japanese series that has previously only been on consoles, and it's really known for just putting insane numbers of enemies on screen that you're just blasting in very like simple arcade gameplay with rocket launchers and grenade launchers and machine guns and stuff, and it's like insect Armageddon, basically. Insects come from space to destroy the Earth, and you run around with a rocket launcher and kill them and like just destroy entire cities at the same time, because I guess the Earth Defense Force doesn't really care about like environmental destruction. Just kill everything in your path. I
mean, that's the same thing with like every Godzilla movie and every Power Rangers fight, right? They destroy half the city while they save it.
It is very much in the vein of those classic Japanese shows, and like all the voice acting, the dubbing is like deliberately really goofy and terrible. I wish I could quote some lines off the top of my head. I can't, but it's really it's a surprisingly fun game, and the loop of it is just like getting new weapons that have different rates of fire and damage values and stuff, and it escalates pretty quickly. So, I have guns now that if I went back to like the first levels, I would just annihilate everything with them, but now it's like, tougher aliens I'm fighting. And on the PC, it runs so well. It's a series known on consoles for like dropping down to 5 frames per second when you have a building collapsing. But I've been playing this game. I have a 980 in my home system, and there'll be these levels where there's like a gigantic alien mothership in the sky that just blots out the sun, half a dozen smaller ships that you're shooting down that are crashing, buildings falling down, huge fireballs, and it still runs at 60 FPS. So that is really fun to see. Like, even though the graphics aren't that great, just the scale of stuff going on in that game is super satisfying to see running at a good frame rate. So that's been fun the past few weeks. And sometimes I rage quit it when the levels have like a crazy difficulty spike. But
Earth Defense Force is also the type of game that I don't get a huge kick out of it. Like, I don't enjoy it very, very much. But also it's the type of game that if you just saw a trailer for it and didn't really know what it was, you'd think it was one of those Steam early access shovelware games that was just junk and looked bad, right?
It's a lot more fun than it looks.
Yeah.
Especially when it has like 4 different soldier classes in the game. And when you're playing a match online and get other people in, and everybody's playing a different class, or you have like at least 2 or 3 of them represented, it totally changes what you're what you're seeing out of the game. Like, I'm playing as the Ranger, I think is the name of the class, who's like the very bare bones. You're stuck to the ground all the time. You have no quick way to get around, but you have a really good arsenal of like heavy rocket launchers and stuff. There's another class that's totally built around calling in support stuff, calling in like airstrikes, laser bombardments, and then tons of vehicles, tanks and like missile launchers, and a giant mech suit that you can get in and pilot. And anybody can pilot that stuff, but you need that kind of player in the game to summon them. So you'll have players you get with online who are like way higher level than you, and they'll just spawn in some ridiculous mech suit and then just like go spawn something else and let you get in that and run around and destroy stuff. So that's really fun.
Cool. Well, there are chants of EDF going out in the chat right now.
EDF.
The little soldiers like chant that, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's great.
Uh-oh.
It has a really good emote system in the game too. You can't type in like your own chat, so you have to use these like hundreds of emotes they put in the game.
Hundreds?
Hundreds.
Oh
There's
my
so
God.
many. For like every circumstance.
Little Jared's coming to play. This is Caleb.
Hi, Caleb.
Hey, Caleb. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, there's a great song that's like broken into like 9 different emotes, like each bar of the song, basically. So very often when I die, I will just like start having my characters sing the song, and people inevitably will join in. It's a good time.
It's funny. When we have Chris or Tyler on the show, they have like puppy dogs climbing on their laps. And we have Jared on the show, and he has a child just climb onto his lap in the middle of it.
I'm home with my 4.5-year-old, so.
Does he have any thoughts on video games?
No, he doesn't have the headphones on, so he can't hear you.
So we can say whatever mean things we want about him. Excellent.
That's cruel, Wes. Well, Jared, what have you been playing lately?
Well, you know me, I'm the hardware guy, so I play less games and I test hardware more. I did get Deus Ex Mankind Divided. I really want to spend some time and play that, but I haven't really had a chance to do so. I did load it up and run.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no. He's frozen and we'll never know what he ran. That's kind of tragic. But moving right along, we'll let Jared sort out his Skype issues as he rejoins us in a moment. It's recalling him, at least. That's good.
Man, I really wanted to know what Jared had to say.
Yeah, I really wanted to know too, but it's tragic. Well, maybe you can mute that computer while it's reconnecting.
Is this a 2-man show now?
It is a 2-man show for now. I'm just going to assume that his child just like consumed him somehow or replaced him in some way and then broke something. But moving right along, I guess I'll go with what I've been playing lately. I jumped into the early access for Battle.Right, which came out yesterday.
You were playing that a lot last night, right? For a few hours?
Yeah, I was playing with Lucas also. So we've both been playing co-op games with Lucas.
That's why I wasn't playing EDF last night.
Because he was playing Battle.Right?
Thanks a lot, yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Lucas and I played Battle.Right along with a couple other people. And for those who don't know, it's the spiritual successor made by the same developers as Bloodline Champions. Bloodline Champions being both games being these, like, I think this was also in Bloodline, but Battle.Right is 2v2 or 3v3, and they're basically the characters, the heroes of a MOBA, but then just in an arena, best of 5 rounds, kill each other. There's no creeps, there's no gold, there's no level ups, there's no items, there's no nexus to destroy. It's just 2v2, drop these characters into the arena, kill each other, first team to die loses a round.
Well, the original source of this kind of framework is from, like, WoW PvP, right? Isn't that what this is kind of descended from?
It's similar, yeah, definitely. It also just reminds me in general of Warcraft 3 mods that did not become Dota, right? Because
it's easy to forget how many Warcraft 3 mods there were
tons
that were not Dota.
Yeah, there were tons and tons and tons. And so, you would have these Warcraft 3 mods that were just, I can't remember specific names of them, but like basically just arena combat games where it was just, hey, you be Thrall and I'll be Uther and we'll fight each other, right? And that's basically what Battle.Right is. And I've been enjoying it a lot, actually. I think it's a really fun game. It's going to be free to play when it leaves early access, but now just in early access, it's $20. And if you buy into the early access, you get all of the heroes forever in perpetuity, as they call it.
So they'll probably offer that as an option, even if you wait till after the early access to buy in.
I imagine so, but I think they said somewhere in the early access thing that, like, the deal that they're offering will probably not be $20 in the actual
game.
game.
Might be like $50 to get all the characters.
Yeah, something like that. And then otherwise, it's just, kind of how you see other MOBAs where they probably will have a free rotation, or some guys will start free, and then you got to use the in-game currency to unlock other heroes permanently, something along those lines. But it's a lot of fun. I think Battle.Right's really, really, really fun. It's very crisp. All the abilities feel good. There's a lot of counterplay in that there are a lot of abilities are indicated very well, and then a lot of people have abilities that are called counters, where kind of like in Smash Bros, if you ever used the Fire Emblem characters in Smash Bros, their down and B would be that they go into a state for a second where they're protected, and if you hit them during that, then they do something. And so that's a pretty common ability type in Battle.Right. So you can see somebody is using an ability where there's a long charge up on it or something like that, and then you can get in the way of it and then use the counter and then get them, and then they're also playing around when you use your counter and stuff like that. It's pretty fun, actually. And I've just been really, really enjoying Battle.Right. I think it's a blast, man.
Did you ever play Power Stone in arcades or on the Dreamcast?
No, you were telling me about it, and we've played a couple games similar to Power Stone. Yeah, we played
like a couple indie brawlers at GDC, then. I think.
And then at E3 as well. I mean, you weren't there, but I played a couple more of those at E3. Yeah.
It's kind of... It's interesting that, like, Smash Bros. And games like that, it kind of so perfectly nailed that niche that no one really wanted to make 3D versions of those kind of like multiplayer brawlers for a long time. Mm-hmm. That genre just kind of died out, I feel like, and in favor of 2D stuff. And I'd like to see that come back and have something that's more about close quarters combat than all of the structure that you get with a typical MOBA.
Yeah, and I also like that it's kind of broken away from... A little bit it's broken away from the MOBA kind of mentality of this is your DPS, this is your magic person, this is your support person, this is your tank. Kind of everyone can deal damage. And the three ways they break up people is melee hero, ranged hero, and support. And support does have healing abilities and shields and stuff like that, but also they can actually hurt and they can actually deal damage, and and they kind of have to, because you can't have a 2v2 game where one of the people is just not dealing any damage. You just wouldn't select that person ever. So it's nice to see kind of less rigid roles than kind of MOBAs we've traditionally seen lately, and kind of the direction it's been going lately. Jared has just gotten back onto Skype, so we might have him rejoining us soon. But in the meantime, why don't I start talking about Gears of War, and we can see if Wes can get Jared back on Skype.
Trying to see it on the monitor where his face normally would be.
This is like
see my mouse cursor.
Yeah, a little higher up, almost at the button.
This makes for great radio.
Yeah, especially with that loud beeping noise. Jared, are you there?
I am.
Welcome back. Now Wes had to navigate the mouse through a delayed monitor on another monitor to the video button, and now he has to go all the way to the bottom to hit a different button to allow people to see you. It's like
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It's like one of those like the steel ball in the puzzle games, that you're like guiding this thing.
I'm so bad at those.
You're really close though. It's almost there. Almost. Yeah. Wait. Oh, we gotcha.
Now you got to zoom me in.
Yeah.
Those steel ball puzzles, I used to actually. I have a vivid memory of destroying one because I hated it so much. It wasn't a nice one. It was like a cheap plastic one.
Well, thank you for not destroying the computer, and thank you for getting Jared back to join us.
Sorry about that. I blame my laptop. I'm not using it for Skype anymore.
It crashed. I think it crashed actually right before last time we had you on too.
Yeah, it did okay, and it's like right when you're like, hey, what are you doing? I start talking, and all of a sudden my screen freezes. I'm like, no, it did not just do that.
Well, so the long-belated question, you said, I just started getting into, or something along those lines, and then it just left us in suspense.
I just started getting into trouble. No. So I just got Deus Ex Mankind Divided.
Right.
I started trying to play it. I want to play the whole game, but I haven't had time because I've been running benchmarks. But I ran the built-in benchmark on my GPU test rig with the cards that it currently had in it. So GTX 1070 SLI, I'm like, come on, this is like super powerful graphics cards. I set it to 1080p. I flipped the ultra setting, and it was like horribly choppy, like 30 to 40 frames per second, I think. And I was like, wow. So I don't know if it didn't have an SLI profile. I don't think it did, maybe at the time. But then I got busy doing other articles, testing hardware, and never got back to it. So I'm looking for the final DirectX 12 patch to drop, and then do some testing of that after I finish like 3 or 4 other articles in the meantime. So
I know that game has some really advanced effects that they're doing in it, and I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I know it's very demanding in general. And yeah, if you didn't have, I'm guessing it probably didn't have an SLI profile, so the whole card was just going to waste.
Yeah, I was just sitting there relaxing, taking a siesta. But yeah, I really liked the last one. Oh man, the FedEx guy is here. I gotta go get the door. This is important. This is like a laptop or something. Just a second.
Jared's gonna have some new hardware goodies to play with. Well, I was gonna ask him if he was like a fan of the original Deus Ex and so on, but
it's too late now.
I think that ship has sailed. Let's go. Let's
talk
go on
about
without
Gears
him.
of War 4. So I got to play Gears of War 4 up, like I said, in Vancouver last week, a lot. And by a lot, I mean I got to play it, and Jared has returned. I got to play, we're talking about Gears of War 4 now, so I got to play for like 3 hours of the campaign, which, probably is actually a lot of the campaign.
At least a quarter of it?
That's what I was figuring, yeah. And then I got to play about 3 hours of versus multiplayer, including this special game mode that they made called Escalation. That specifically, they used this buzzword a million times, and they were using so many marketing buzzwords it was hurting my head. But Microsoft kept being like, "We designed this specifically with esports in mind, and this is our esports competitive thing where we talk to pro gamers to talk about what they want." And they were telling me about this proprietary Microsoft matchmaking system that they use to make sure they get balanced games. And I was like, this all sounds very buzzwordy.
Haven't they had that called True Skill for like 10 years?
I guess. I don't know. They didn't use the word True Skill, though.
Maybe they made a new one because that one was bad. I don't know.
Anyway, the mode itself, Escalation, is actually really fun. So at least underneath all of that buzzwordy marketing stuff, they actually did make like a very fun competitive mode for Gears.
But you have to be a pro gamer to enjoy it, right?
No, they have a competitive playlist. And then they have a non-competitive, like a casual playlist in the Versus. It's actually pretty cool, too, where they have modes like just the regular team deathmatch is in that. And then there's a mode called Dodgeball, where it's 5v5. And every time you get a kill, someone on your team that has died comes back into the game, like a game of dodgeball.
Oh, that's cool.
So you can have these really cool kind of swings where it'll be 1v4, and then if the one gets just one kill, then it becomes 2v3, and if they get another kill, then it becomes 3v2, and suddenly they're in an advantage.
I like that a lot, actually, because the original Gears, their main multiplayer mode was not just regular team deathmatch, it was elimination, much like Counter-Strike, where you have two teams of, I think it was 5 in the original Gears, or maybe it was 4 on 4, 4 on 4 or 5 on 5, and when you were dead, that was it. You were out for the round.
Yeah.
And that fit Gears really well, whereas I feel like your typical team deathmatch respawning and just, whoever gets to 50 kills or 25 kills or whatever first wins doesn't quite fit that series as well as it does some kind of faster paced shooters.
Yeah.
So I like the idea that they're kind of building on what Gears was known for.
Execution was the mode
10 years ago. Was that what it was called?
Okay. Yeah, and they still have that in the competitive list, but they told me that the reason they built Escalation was because Execution is like not a fun game mode to watch, because if it gets down to like 4v1, that one person is just going to be running away for the entire rest of the match, basically. The other cool mode that I played with Versus was basically a gun game. They have inverted gun game, and it's team gun game. So for those who don't know, gun game is after you get a certain number of points or kills, you automatically swap guns, and you're locked into this one gun. And then there's a playlist of, you go through a progression of some sort of guns, and there's lots of different ways to play it. When we did GoldenEye Source, we were doing gun games where it was really silly things where you started with hand grenades, and then you went to proximity mines, and then you went to timed mines, and it was just super weird and cool. The way that this gun game works, and it was actually one of my favorite modes that I played, it was 5v5. As soon as your team got 3 kills, you'd start with the strongest gun in the game, and as soon as your team got 3 kills, you'd go one gun worse. And there were 13 guns. So it started with the boom shot, I think it was called, which is basically like a noob tube.
Yep.
Little grenade launcher thing. And then the last gun was a pistol. And so you'd get down to the bottom, and it was like you'd have these really weird interactions where it was a team full of 5 sniper rifles versus a team full of 5 shotguns. And these two teams were just vying for, if the shotgun got close, they would win, but if they were far away, the long shots could just pick them off easy. It was really weird. And then, of course, everyone would end with just a pistol fight, and it was super strange.
I'm curious if Jared has, I don't know if you've followed any of the Gears stuff at all, but I think this is the first game that Microsoft is launching on the Universal Windows app platform that has decent potential to be like a graphical showcase for them. They've been going pretty far out of their way to talk about how many graphic settings it's going to have on PC and all this stuff. Have you had much experience trying to benchmark or measure any of the UWP games so far? Because they're kind of incompatible with a lot of the tools that we use in the past. Oh,
Jared, I believe you're muted now.
You're muted, Jared.
Sorry.
Start over.
I bumped the button. So they don't work with Fraps. Obviously, DirectX 12 games in general don't work with Fraps. Does UWP inherently mean DX12? I don't think it does, but It often is right now.
I think at least the proprietary, the first-party Microsoft games are almost definitely going to be DirectX 12.
Yeah, I think all of them are. Yeah.
Yeah, so DirectX 12 basically requires a different form of access. I think there are a few tools that you can do. Overlays are difficult to get done right with DirectX 12 because especially with UWP, I think it locks you out. But there's low-level command line tools. There's one called PresentMon that some Microsoft developers have worked on, and it's on GitHub. So I've used that, but it's funny because it's very it's super basic. Like you start it up and you press scroll lock to start the frame monitoring and scroll lock again to end it, but it doesn't create like separate files between runs, and it doesn't do a lot of stuff that I would like it to do, including overlays and calculating averages. So you have to do all that stuff manually. So yeah, DirectX 12 stuff that doesn't have built-in benchmarks can be a serious time sink and a pain in the butt.
So you're not going to have a lot of fun benchmarking Gears of War.
The sad thing is I have not played a single Gears of War game. I mean, I don't even own any consoles, but even the ones that made it to PC, I just never got around to.
It was 1 and 2. 1 and 2 came out on PC, and then 3 never did.
I don't think it was even 2. It was just 1.
Was it just 1?
Yeah,
I think so.
No, I think 2 came out, and it was so, like, literally. I remember seeing Mike Capps of Epic give a talk at one point at an event.
It says just
Am I wrong?
360.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
Google
it was,
tells me it's just 360.
Maybe it was Gears 1 that came out on PC and just had nobody play it. And so actually, yeah.
It came out like 6 months later.
Yeah, it came out late.
Other things.
This was, I guess, when I went to this event, it was probably like 7 years ago or something. And Mike Capps was like, "Thank you to the 4 people who bought Gears of War on PC, but we are not doing Gears 2 on PC for that reason."
Yeah, no. So it came out a full year later on, I think, or maybe it was 6 months later. It came out later on PC, and it was a while, and it was kind of whatever. I think it was Rod Ferguson, the head of the Coalition. He's worked on Gears of War since the very, very first one, was saying that they basically just rushed it out the door for Games for Windows Live, the port of that one. Like, they just were like, we just got to do it for Games for Windows Live on PC, and they just pushed it, and they just got it out there, and it wasn't like meant to be on PC basically at all. Whereas Gears of War 4, they saw Gears of War Ultimate Edition having such a rough launch in March of this year, and they fixed a lot of the issues with it since then, but it had such a rough release that they took a step back and they kind of reevaluated what they were doing with Gears 4, and they've actually had a PC dedicated team, a Windows 10 team, working on the game since the beginning. And they said to me, it is not a port of the Xbox version of Gears of War 4. It is a Windows version of the game, which is encouraging to hear. And I thought it ran pretty well. And on actually benchmarking that we were talking about before, it has a built-in benchmarking tool. And not only does it have a built-in benchmarking tool, I showed you some photos, Jared, that I thought you might enjoy. It's like a pretty comprehensive built-in benchmarking tool. It gives you frames per second, average frame per second. It tells you all of the settings are editable, and then you can just rerun the benchmark. It gives you a little graph of all of the frames per second for the GPU, the frames per second your CPU was getting, the frames per second like average. It tells you how CPU or GPU bound your game is. So if you want to upgrade your system to make it run better, you can say, my GPU is really the thing holding me back here. It's got a pretty damn nice benchmarking tool. As I said to Jared, or as Jared said to me, it's the only thing is missing is like an export to Excel button, right?
I love that when somebody comes back from an event, they're like, "Oh, I have 3 hours of Gears footage I captured or something," and it's like when we come back for Jared, we're like, "Jared, we got screenshots of the benchmarking tool."
Excellent. Yeah. So the interesting thing with DirectX 12, like they actually, Ashes of the Singularity kind of has something similar, I think. I haven't seen the Gears benchmarking tools, but other than the screenshot, but they show all of these statistics that aren't normally useful under DirectX 12, like your CPU time in DX11 games really didn't mean much. And so on Ashes of the Singularity, for example, if you look at the CPU time in the benchmark, I can't remember if it was like meaningless or the same as the GPU time or something, but it was only useful under DX12 because they had essentially lower level monitoring and it meant something, whereas in DX11 it doesn't mean as much. The multi-threadedness of DX12 makes it a lot better, easier to do these monitoring of the various components in your system.
And they've got weird things like they've got this weird setting in the advanced settings of the Gears of War 4 video option, which dynamically scales the resolution of your game between 10% and 50% smaller to maintain frame rate. And I didn't get a chance to test this out because I was on like a 3440 by 1440 ultra wide monitor, and it was running a 1080 and had like 64 gigs of RAM, and there was no way that the game was going to drop frames to need to do that. But on lower level GPUs, I could see it actually, like, if that works, I don't know if it works, but if it works, that could be pretty cool.
Well, it's something they designed for the Xbox One that some other games have made use of. Like, I know Halo 4 or Halo 5 on the Xbox One uses that technology. And it's, I think, as a result of people have gotten so obsessed with the numbers of 1080p and 60, but they care about the 60 a bit more.
Right.
You know, like the frame rate discussion is like 30 FPS. So many people just scoff at now that Microsoft made it a priority to make sure that games can hit, you know, if it's going to be a game that runs at 60 FPS, they want to make sure that it can run at 60 FPS even when there's, 10 things exploding on the screen at one time. And there are different ways to accomplish that, but, one of which would be just simplify everything in the game to the point at which the most intense moment will still run at that frame rate. Or you can try to do something new, which is change the resolution that you're rendering the image at dynamically to make sure that frame rate target is met. And I have no idea how difficult it is to do that. I don't know, Jared, do you have any insight on how that stuff works?
I mean, it's an interesting task to tackle, like trying to scale your resolution. So if you looked at Shadow of Mordor, that game actually, if you go into the graphics settings, when you boot it up, it boots up at your desktop's your desktop's resolution. So if you're running at 2560 by 1440, that's what the game is running at. And then you go to the resolution setting, and it says, what percentage of this do you want to render at? And then we'll stretch it or shrink it to fit your screen. And so you can say, hey, run it at 200%. And so it will run at, it will render at this insane 5120 by 2880 resolution, and then try and scale it down, and you basically get super sample anti-aliasing doing that. Obviously, that would require some serious graphics power. But so Gears is taking that a step further and saying, we'll dynamically change that resolution, presumably on a frame-by-frame basis. So they have some insight as they're rendering the CPU side of the frames, like how much overhead was there, how long did that take, and so using that they can probably project to some level, how much do we need to scale down in order to hit the frame rate target we're after. So it's really interesting to talk about. How it looks is something I'd have to see. Obviously, it totally breaks benchmarking. Like, it's like benchmarking
Right.
Virtual reality. Like virtual reality benchmarks where you load up a game that's totally written for virtual reality. It's going to be hard because they've got asynchronous time warp and these other techniques to try and hide the frame rate drops where, VR is trying to run at 90 frames per second. So it's like, hey, if we drop below that, we're just going to fake it and do an extra warping of the last frame, and it will still kind of look like 90 frames per second. So if you were to try and run Fraps or whatever tool to capture frame rates, it can get thrown off by that. So, I mean, it's a good thing for smoothness. Obviously, it's potentially degrading graphics quality, but and some people get like, I laugh because I review graphics cards and people are like, oh no, you can't run on medium or you can't run on high. And I mean, yeah, you can. Like, we played games when I was growing up. We played games, on these stupid TVs that were super low resolution and had 4 colors or whatever, and it looked terrible, and we still thought we were having fun. And great graphics are nice and all, but the difference between ultra quality and high quality is often a lot lower than you might think.
And also, that's just kind of a mentality that a lot of gamers have nowadays, right? Is they'll run a game at max, like the highest possible settings it can go, with a computer that is probably a very good computer, but maybe cannot handle that, and then complain that it runs like shit, and go to Reddit and be like, this game runs terribly. And it's like, well, if you're not running it if you insist on running it at the highest possible stuff with the highest anti-aliasing and all that jazz, and it's running crappily, like, just turn down the settings, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that doesn't mean the game's not optimized well. It just means that it's demanding on high settings.
Unacceptable,
I guess.
We're putting up an article soon kind of on this subject of understanding what some of those settings mean and what optimization actually means in games. But I think this feature is interesting, especially if it becomes really common in AAA games, because it can make those games, if you're playing them on potentially a somewhat weaker system, sort of like streaming from Netflix or something, where they chose the trade-off of poorer image quality over stuttering or pausing, right? So sometimes you're watching a Netflix stream, and for whatever reason, somewhere between your house and the server, an internet connection is like getting throttled, right? And so all of a sudden the picture quality drops from 1080 to 480 or something like that, and it gets all fuzzy. And that's really annoying, but you would probably rather have a fuzzy picture than your movie just stopping for 30 seconds until it can catch up. So
that's the worst when especially if it's always at the climax of the movie, right? So talking about this rendering, this dynamic scaling of quality, there's an interesting kind of tangential thing here. It's like foveated rendering, where like the idea is where your eyes are looking, that's the most important thing, and so you would render that higher quality. I know NVIDIA has their multi-res shading thing that allows them to do some interesting stuff. Actually, I think they could do it on Maxwell as well. It was called multi-viewport technology, or anyway. So the net result is they could define multiple viewports around the screen and say, the center we're going to render at maximum quality, and then these corner pieces, we're going to reduce the quality on all of them, and in some cases they might be able to essentially drop the number of pixels you're rendering by 50% and still not really look that much worse. So I mean, there's a lot of interesting tricks that they could potentially pull off using similar type approaches.
Before we move on, there's a couple of gems in the chat right now with Kanifu says, optimizing my graphic settings for a game sometimes turns out to be the part where I have the most fun. And I say, I'll sometimes agree with that, unless they make you restart the computer or restart the game every single time you change a setting, and then have a minute and a half of unskippable logo cutscenes at the beginning, and then every time you want to change a setting, it's like a 3-minute process to change one thing. That drives me crazy.
That's pretty shameful. Luckily, not many games do that anymore.
Not a whole lot.
Actually, a lot do.
Says the guy who actually has to do it all the time.
And the worst thing is if you're running benchmarks, a lot of games, like, I usually check it when I first start on benchmarking a new game. I'm like, okay, run it at 1080p ultra, then change it to 1440p ultra and run it again. Then exit the game, restart the game, still at 1440p ultra, run the benchmark again, and make sure that the benchmark numbers didn't change between the restart, because there are games where when you start the next benchmark sequence, if you haven't exited but you've changed resolution or quality, it won't even tell you, but it will run differently. And so you're like, oh, crap. So yeah, unskippable intro logos and stuff, those are the bane of my existence.
You can go into the INI files sometimes and change like a number, and suddenly that'll make those intros not play. But
yeah, so like Doom, there's a command line parameter that you can add on that's like +com skip intro videos 1, and it will skip the intro videos. Batman Arkham Origins, which is a game that I'm probably going to retire from my benchmark list shortly, but the thing you do there is you go into the videos directory and you rename or delete or whatever all of the intro videos that you don't want to see, and it will then load really fast.
So it just can't find them and it just doesn't play them?
Rename them. No, hell no. Please no.
Then there's other games. I want to say like some of the Ubisoft stuff. I can't remember who else, but there's some where if you delete those files or rename them or whatever, they'll just pause and you'll get like this black screen for 30 seconds. You're like, oh, that's just lovely.
I just want to change my texture quality in peace, man. Come on.
Yep.
Well, let's start talking a little bit more about GPUs, but in a different context here. This is, as I said, the state of the GPUnion, which really just means I want you to catch us up on what's been happening, man. Because let's start with the GTX 1080 Ti rumor leak thing, which, as far as I understand, you probably think is bogus, but let's give us a little bit of a background for the uninformed.
By the way, we really deserve like a late night talk show style like splash image and cheesy voiceover for State of the GPUnion.
Yeah.
With like an eagle flying through it or something.
Yeah.
So 1080 Ti, like it's pretty much inevitable, right? Like unless NVIDIA decides to change their naming scheme, they'll have a 1080 Ti at some point in the future. And at this point, we know they've got GP102. They're using it on their Quadro P6000. They're using it on the Titan X. The P6000 has all of the functional units enabled. The Titan X does not. They can disable a few more. They could actually enable more. So it's like this. There's only so many things they could do, though. So functional units in NVIDIA parlance right now mean 128 CUDA cores that you can disable at a time. So there's, oh gosh, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's 40 maximum SMs in the P102, GP102. So it's like, well, they're doing 38 in the Titan X, and so they could go down to 36, or they could go down to 34, and you just do the math, and it's like that's a good guess at what it will be. And there's really only maximum, I'd say there's 6 possibilities. So if you wanted to guess all 6, one of them would be right on the core count. But the question is whether it's a legit leak or someone just guessing, and photoshopping. And I don't know. Like, people have sources. They spend a lot of time on it. Me, I'm just like, it doesn't really matter like what the exact specs are, because we know it's going to be fast, and it's probably going to be close to the Titan X performance, and it's probably going to cost $400 less. And depending on, and the big wild card is what's AMD doing. So AMD's got their Vega 10 architecture that's supposed to come out probably beginning of 2017, and it's going to use, by all accounts, HBM2 memory, which means like they could have 768 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. They could also have 1 terabyte per second of bandwidth. And when you couple that with all their shader processing and the die shrinks and all that, the process technology shrink, AMD could have a really monster of a chip, and it might be faster than Titan X.
Now,
if it is...
A question, wasn't the rumor leading up to pre-10 series, NVIDIA 10 series launching, was NVIDIA was going to be using HBM2? Right? Like, that was kind of what everybody thought up until, I don't know, some point in the last 6 months.
People talked about it.
And that went away.
Well, so people talked about HBM2. They thought, like, it's this thing where everyone's like, oh, it's the next big thing. Look how much more bandwidth it delivers. And it does. The problem being is HBM is expensive. So, AMD's Fiji cards were the first and only, as far as I know, HBM cards to hit the consumer sector. And they have to. So you got this chip. Here's your GPU chip. Then you have the memory chips around it, and you've got to build this silicon interposer that's as big as all those chips plus your main chip, which limits your die size in various ways because the silicon interposer usually can't be bigger than, I think it's like 600 millimeters squared or 800 millimeters squared or whatever it is. So it's expensive because you've got to create the silicon interposer, and the HBM memory is brand new, and that's expensive. Whereas GDDR5, it's been around a long time. It's not as power friendly, but cost considerations are something that's always a factor on consumer parts. So NVIDIA has HBM2 in their GP100 chip, which they're putting into supercomputer clusters, essentially, is the only place it's shown up so far. They're Tesla P100, and what is it, Tesla? There's a second Tesla that I can't remember.
And those are computers that are never going to, not meant for games in any way, shape, or form.
Well, and the thing is, they're not even using PCI Express connections. They're using NVIDIA's new NVLink socket, which is this mezzanine connector. So picture this phone, imagine that's your GPU instead of this big card with a slot, and there's all these pins on the back of it, and it just pushes down into the motherboard directly. So they have their DGX1 server has 8 of those mezzanine sockets, and they come populated with the GP100 Tesla cards, and yeah, they're super powerful for doing what they do, and the DGX1 server costs $129,000, and it's back ordered until sometime next year.
Right, that would be an expensive gaming PC.
Yeah, and so the estimate is in the Tesla P100, NVIDIA is probably charging in the neighborhood of $12,000 per Tesla P100.
So the interface for those GPUs is more like a CPU socket on a mainstream motherboard, kind of.
Yeah.
In style.
So if I remember right, each Tesla P100 has 3 NVLink connectors. So one of them talks to the host system, the motherboard and processor, and then the other 2 are used to talk to other Tesla cards. And so they get this cross topology where each GPU talks to 2 other GPUs plus the CPU, and so the most hops that you'd have to go from GPU X to GPU Y is two links. So you might have to go from A to B to F or A to C to G, but you would never have to do a third hop, and it helps with throughput for super complex supercomputing stuff.
So I have a question for you that kind of goes back to the potential specs of the 1080 that we were talking about. Something I think a lot of people don't understand the nuances of, or don't know the nuances of in manufacturing for GPUs and CPUs and a lot of technology stuff, is the concept of binning, and also how so you said, for example, the 1080 would have a certain number of CUDA cores enabled, or functional units enabled on the card, which would be a lower number than would be enabled on the Titan X, which is also slightly lower than the Quadro series, right?
Yeah.
And so that some people will look at those cards and say, oh, NVIDIA took this chip that has such and such capabilities, and they just disabled some of the units and then sold it to me as a cheaper card, but but I'm actually losing functionality that they just disabled on it. But that's not how it works, right? Usually that functionality is a chip that kind of came off the assembly line imperfect, so to speak, without everything functioning properly, and then they go, okay, this isn't functioning to the standard of the 1080, but it is functioning to the standard of a 1060, or however that tiering works, and then that's how binning works, essentially.
Yeah, so basically, silicon microchips are made. They create this super huge monocrystal of silicon, and it's 300 millimeters in diameter. And then they slice it into wafers, and then they etch the circuitry of the chip onto those wafers. But the problem is the silicon wafer, even though it's close to pure, it's not perfectly pure. And so there's a sweet spot. I think it's usually in the center of the wafer, where you're more likely to get perfect chips that work ideally. And as you go to the outside edges of the wafer, there's more chance that there's imperfections, just like imagine just a fraction of a percentage of a warped silicon matrix that ends up causing either it needs more power or it just doesn't work at all. So this is why like the best chip size for, if you're mass producing economical processors, like 100 millimeters or 100 millimeters squared, or maybe like 140 millimeters square is a great size, because that means, if you make 400 chips or whatever fits onto a wafer, and you've got like 20 imperfections, well, you lose 20 chips, say, but that gives you 380 chips. If you're making these massive chips and you only get 30 of them off of a wafer, and you got 10 imperfections or 20 imperfections, you could potentially lose over half of your chips. So in order to get around that, they start building in redundancies in the chips. And they build in ways where they go, okay, we'll be able to test the chip and see what works and what doesn't. And so, in the terms of graphics cards, they go, hey, we have these SM clusters, and there's 64 cores each on AMD. The GP100 from NVIDIA is also 64 cores per cluster, but all of NVIDIA's other GP102, GP104, GP106, and Maxwell series, they're 128 cores per cluster, and they can disable each one of those individually. So it doesn't matter if, I did the number wrong earlier. It's 30 SMs per GP102 chip. So anyway, it's like you've got 30 of them. It doesn't matter which one of those is bad, but if there's one bad, you can disable it. And so they disabled 2 for the Titan X, I think. Is that right? 28 times 128? And they could disable 4, they could disable 6, they could disable none. So, and we saw something. I tested Broadwell E during the past couple of months.
Intel's best top-of-the-line CPUs right now.
Their big processor. There's 10 cores on that, right? So the i7-6950X has all 10 cores enabled because it was an ideal chip. It worked well. The i7-6900K disables 2 cores. The i7-6800K and the 6850K disable 4 cores, and you get a 6-core chip, right? Well, most likely those 6800Ks and 6850Ks are lower quality chips. They're less desirable. And so when I tested, I found that the 6800K used more power at idle, even with 4 fewer cores, than the 6950X. It required more voltage to overclock. It didn't overclock quite as far as maybe you might expect. It hit 4.4 gigahertz. Well, that's because, there was a reason that this chip got binned and sold as a 6800K instead of a 6900K.
So they're all if I'm understanding you correctly, like they're all essentially pressed from the same template, to put it bluntly. And the lower power chips are almost just like the rejects that they've rebranded.
Well, and they're not even rejects. Like that's, Don't think of it as a reject, right? It's just like, hey, we made this complex chip and we know a percentage of them are going to fail to run at the full capabilities. Either they'll need too much voltage, or there will be certain areas of the chip that don't run right. So we'll have the option to disable parts of them, and then we can sell it as a lesser chip. So, when we say GP102, that is one specific chip from NVIDIA, and right now it's used in some Quadro cards and the Titan X, and it will probably be in the 1080 Ti. The GP104 is used in another Quadro card, I believe, and then it's also used in the 1080 and the 1070. The GP106 is used in the 1060 and, some laptop stuff, so they basically say, well, we'll have this really big chip that will be the high end, and we'll have somewhere between 24 to 30 SMs enabled. Then we'll have our medium chip that will be the mid-range that has, 18 to 24 or something SMs enabled, and then they just kind of go down the ladder. And the fewer cores there are, the less complex the chip is, the smaller it is, the higher the yields, the less need there is to disable functional units.
It occurs to me that Jared Walton knows more about computer components and GPUs and CPUs, then maybe I will know about anything in my entire life.
You know a lot more about games, right?
Dream big, Tom. You can do it. But yeah, I think that's an interesting subject because when any of us go to buy a product on the shelf, we really just think of it as this product that is meant to fulfill a very specific purpose. It's supposed to work. We get pissed when it doesn't work right. We think it just kind of appeared wholly formed by itself. And it's interesting how much of CPU, computer technology is built around these massive manufacturing processes that have to do incredibly intricate things. Yeah. And the only way those scales work for the companies that produce these things, or at least the only way it works for them to make lots of money, is to plan in that manufacturing process for a calculated degree of failure, essentially. They know that, like Jared said, out of 1,000 chips they're going to produce, 600 of them are going to be imperfect, or, I'm just completely making those numbers up.
Right.
But so they design products so that an imperfect chip can actually fulfill a slightly lesser but still, fill its own role, basically.
It's nutty, man.
Yeah.
And it's economies of scale, too. So, they know not everyone wants to buy a $300 processor, right, or a $400 graphics card. So they're like, hey, we know we'll have a lot more people wanting the $200 card. Initially, we'll have a lot of rejects. As time goes on, we might perfect the process, and we get fewer and fewer rejects. And so eventually, you start hitting a point where it's like, you know what, we have people wanting to buy this this Core i5 or this RX 470. They don't want to pay for the full-blown, fully enabled chip, but we don't actually have any bad chips, and so then they might actually disable a fully functioning chip. They may or may not bin it. And so there's been cards in the past. So, AMD's HD 5850, I believe, was usually unlockable to 5870. The 7950, I can't remember if that could be unlocked. I think it could in some cases. So AMD, at least in the past on graphics cards, there were video BIOS updates that you could force a flash of a new video BIOS onto a system, and it would actually enable those cores that were previously disabled. I think NVIDIA has been better about, when they disable them, they actually fuse them off. They burn out the portion of the chip, or at least a connector to that portion, so that you can't enable it. It can be more difficult to do that. So it varies by the processor and such, whether or not you can actually enable things that were once disabled. But people are always hoping for a free lunch. They're like, hey, it's kind of like it's like overclocking, right? Why buy a crazy expensive $400 CPU if you can buy a $200 CPU and get the same performance via overclocking? So,
well, Jared, thank you for that. Just incredible detail, because I didn't know basically any of what you just told me, and it was really really cool. At least I thought so.
And if you guys heard that and were interested in it, you should check out the site for some older stories that I did and our Hardware EIC Tuan did, where we went and visited a few factories where you can see some of that manufacturing behind the scenes, see the giant machines they use, and all that cool stuff. So yeah, just do search PC Gamer for manufacturing or
factory tour.
Factory tour. There you go.
The Obsidian Tower in chat just said dissertation and nothing else, which I think, yeah. If you want more, Jared also just posted recently what we called the Idiot's Guide to Buying a GPU.
I did not make up that name. That was Wes's idea.
Jared's calling you an idiot.
No. But it's a much more understandable, kind of slimmed down, simpler version or not version of what he said, but just kind of guide to upgrading and when you want to upgrade and why and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and you can always find just more of Jared's stuff at pcgamer.com/hardware.
All the information we just gave you is basically irrelevant to you just going to Amazon or Newegg and buying an actual graphics card that works for you.
But don't you feel better knowing it? And
Yes.
I do. But if you don't care about any of that techno babble that we just dropped on you, the Idiot's Guide is a good place to just know what kind of card you should get for your price range and with, what you're upgrading from.
Well,
Do you know why I know all this stuff about hardware? I'll tell you.
Please.
It goes back to gaming. The first computer that I bought with my own money, I was 16 years old. I worked all summer long. 1990, end of the summer, I go out and buy a computer, and I spent like $2,200, $2,500, and I got a 286 12 megahertz. And then in October of that year, this guy named Chris Roberts, you might have heard of him. He released a game. I believe it was his first game. It was called Wing Commander. So this is the same guy behind Star Citizen. It's kind of the 30 years later update, like what can we do now, or 25 years later. Anyway, Wing Commander came out, and my nearly brand new PC couldn't run it very well at all.
man.
There were a bunch of features I couldn't enable. I was like, no, I just spent 25. So I was pretty torqued. And so then my dad helped me sell that computer. I got a 386 instead. I actually didn't lose very much money, thankfully. But ever since then, I'm like, okay, I am not going to buy a crappy computer that's going to be totally obsolete like 2 months later again. That was terrible.
So if a 286 cost you something like $2,500 in 1990 money, I forget what year you said it was. How much was a 386 going for at the time?
They were like $2,500 to $3,000 for a complete system.
And
So
and they existed, and you just cheaped out at the time. You were just like,
Yeah,
this will
well-
be good enough.
Well, it was, yeah. I mean, this was the thing. I was a young 16-year-old kid, and you didn't have the internet to research things on. You had to go to like old magazines, and some of those magazines were not the most up to date. They would come up with these recommendations that you just thought, oh, okay, maybe. So yeah. So
Chris?
I got a fun fact for you. I did some math and some calculations, roughly speaking. 30 years later, well, not even 30 years later, this is 26 years later, my modern test bed upstairs is about 200,000 times faster than my 286 was.
200,000?
That was my rough estimate. Like I looked on
God.
Wikipedia. They said that the 286 12 megahertz was capable of like 1.25 MIPS, millions of instructions per second. So nowadays the i7 5930K it's sitting at somewhere like 250,000 MIPS.
And that's not even accounting for the fact that you have a graphics accelerator
and
that's insanely more complex than the non-existent
Yeah, the graphics card, my old VGA card in that 286 was like, if you could compare them even, and you can't really, it's probably like 1 billion times slower.
And one last thing on this before we talk about games. I don't know if you've done the math, but that $2,500 26 years ago, that has to be at least $6,000 with inflation now, right?
There wasn't that much inflation. Really?
I think so.
I don't know. Like, I don't think prices on computers have really changed. Like, it hasn't felt like prices have changed that much to me. Maybe that's like games used to cost $40 and now they cost like $50. That's not too bad.
But cartridge games, I mean, in a
That's
way,
true.
it's cheaper.
I earned $6.50 an hour working all summer. So, and I thought I was making decent money back then. So
some random internet site tells me that in 1990, $2,500 is now $4,600.
Okay,
So
almost doubled.
yeah. Also, real quick, before we lose it and before we move on, Chris86 in the chat said, I still have my 386.
Nice.
And said it was a great system. So
Nice.
can you boot it up?
that's the real question, isn't
What's
it?
the latest operating system that could run? Maybe Windows 98. I don't even
Let's
know.
benchmark it.
My 386 definitely ran on Windows 3.1. I don't think we ever put 95 on it. I think that was a new system at that
That was
point.
a 486 or Pentium type system that you wanted.
Man. Well, let's stop looking. He says it does run 3.1, so there you go. But let's
Windows-
stop looking backwards and let's start looking a little bit forwards at just what's coming out in the next couple months. Just a little bit of a preview for the busy release season ahead of us. A lot of games. We have this really good article on the site called like the fall games of 2016, basically, just like looking at some of the bigger releases.
I know which one you're waiting for, Tom.
Which one am I waiting for?
Civilization.
Yeah,
6.
so basically yes is the answer to that.
There's no subtitle for this one, right?
6
is
the subtitle.
It's not.
Civilization :
It's not quite
6
a subtitle, but okay.
dash and then 6 spelled out.
I guess did the previous games, didn't Civ 4 have a subtitle, or was that only with expansions?
I think it's just the
Maybe it's
expansions.
just expansions.
Usually it's Sid Meier's : Civilization.
Yes, it's
Civilization is actually the subtitle.
It's Sid Meier's Civilization 6, and then in Civ 5 they did Brave New World and Gods and Kings after the.
Are they still calling it Sid Meier's Civilization? Like
I believe they don't officially do that on like they used to do it on sites and stuff, like on Steam. It was
As if
called
it was part
Sid
of the name,
Meier's
yeah.
Civilization.
Like how
6.
how many people work on that game? Like how ticked off would you be? Like, man, we all put our heart and soul into this, and he gets his name front billing.
Still there.
Yeah, it's still there. So it is actually on Steam still Sid Meier's Civilization, trademark symbol VI for 6.
That's got to be a contractual or maybe it's tied to the trademark.
So Sid Meier came, I call him Sid Meier's, I mean, God.
Sid Meier's body.
Yeah, Sid Meier came into the office over a year ago, and at this point now he was promoting Starships right after Beyond Earth came out. And he told me, I was asking him, like, because, Firaxis does XCOM also, but it's not Sid Meier's XCOM, but it is Sid Meier's Pirates, right? And
or was. It's been a while.
I played the old Pirates on Commodore 64. That was good times.
All right, you've dated yourself enough, Jared. Come on now.
I almost failed college because of Civilization 2.
Oh my God. He was telling me that Sid Meier's, like, they add it to any series that he has had direct influence on the design of. And I think that the Civilization series he's no longer a direct designer of, but since it is the series, since he did have a direct hand in the series, had his name. And they didn't add him to XCOM because he wasn't a direct part of that, even though Firaxis, or like he wasn't like the lead designer on it and that sort of stuff. Also, this is my favorite. People are calling out subtitles for what Civ 6's subtitle would be. Civilization 6, Back to the Past, because after Beyond Earth, I like that one. Civilization 6, The Passage of Time. Civilization 6, One More Turn, ? And then, where'd it go, my favorite one? Civilization 6, This Is Your Life Now.
Welcome to your new job.
Yeah.
So that might be your life once Civ 6 comes out.
It might be, dude.
We might be missing Tom Marks in the near future.
I'll be gone for a bit, but I come out of Civ pretty okay. Like I'll binge it for a few days probably, and then kind of ease off a lot on it.
What's the launch date?
It is October. Give me 3 seconds, and I'll find it for you. 21st.
1 month.
Exactly 1 month from today, we'll have our hands on that. And I got to play about 100 turns of it already back at 2K, and I'm like a month ago maybe, and it was really, really fun, and I'm really excited to see it a little bit more finished. One of the things actually that I didn't talk about back then that I'm hoping has changed a little bit since the game since I played the demo version of it, is there's a little more granular things. Like, they show up to 1 decimal point now, so it's not like 30 gold, 100 gold, it's like 30.7, and that's for your religion value and your science value and your culture value, and all those things have these like 1 decimal point on them, and I thought it made it look a little bit muddy.
That sounds like something I would do.
Right? Like, it was just...
You'd do 2 decimal points, Jared.
No.
You can't do 2. It's either 3 or 1. Come on, don't be a monster now, Wes. But what about you guys? There's a bunch of stuff. There's Gears 4, which we talked about. There's Mafia, Battlefield 1, Dark Souls 3's DLC, Gwent, and the Skyrim Special Edition, all just next month. That's all just in October is those games, which is insane.
I'll probably be playing a lot of Gwent. Hopefully find it enjoyable long term outside of The Witcher 3 proper. I played a ton of Gwent in The Witcher 3, and I'm hoping that I will enjoy playing it as a competitive game as much as I'm expecting to. And I'm really excited for the single player campaigns that they're going to add to that. But I don't know if any of those are going to even come out this year, because they're launching it in beta in October, and that's clearly going to be for the purposes of balancing and working out the kinks of this as a multiplayer game before they release the paid single player stuff for it. So I have no idea when that's going to be coming. They haven't said anything about that stuff other than it exists.
And that's the stuff I'm more excited about as well. I'm kind of hesitant on trying to get into a
fourth card game.
Yeah, because I'm still really into right now. The two card games I'm playing a lot are Duelist and Hex. I actually just got back into a little bit because Hex's single player mode is a lot of fun. But yeah, and then there's also, like I was saying, Eternal is cool, and Elder Scrolls Legends is cool, and Hearthstone is still updating, and it's like I find it hard to get into another multiplayer card game, but I would be down for Gwent single player whenever that arrives.
Yeah, you would probably want to drop at least one of those were you to try to spend any significant time with it.
Oh, God,
although I think it's
seriously.
probably a much easier one to pick up and play than a lot of the others because you don't have some of the really common card game staples of like a mana pool, health pool. Those kind of mechanics just don't exist in Gwent. It's just like, what do your numbers add up to, and how are you going to balance the use of all your cards? You don't have tapping stuff, and you don't have a lot of the Magic the Gathering kind of mechanics that have been filtered through all these other card games. So I think that'll make it kind of like a decent companion game to a Hearthstone or something if you're already into playing one of those a lot. But if you're like Tom and already play 17 card games, then you might not play Gwent.
Yeah.
But I will play Gwent.
One thing that got called out actually by Chris86 in the chat was Virginia comes out tomorrow. If anybody has or hasn't heard of this game, kind of like a Twin Peaksy adventure game with this weird, very vibrant polygonal art style. I'm excited for this one, especially.
I think James wrote something about it on the site.
Yeah, I believe he did, and I'm excited for this one, especially after Stranger Things. After I got totally, because I really, really enjoyed Stranger Things on Netflix, and I think Virginia might scratch a little bit of that itch as we wait for the second season.
This game was basically made for James.
Yeah, it really was.
I mean, there's a bison right there. Like, it's a dead bird in a box. I mean, it's a James game.
Because when I think James, I think bison and dead bird in a box.
Same.
Those are really the two descriptors that jump to mind. Yep. But yeah, let's keep looking at that list and go through a couple of the others. There's in November. November is always the month I think of as
big game time.
Big game time, but it might be that actually end of October is stolen a little bit of that. We got Call of Duty Infinite War, Dishonored 2, Watch Dogs 2, and Planet Coaster are kind of the big ones in November, which are all definitely big games, but it seemed like they were at the end of October as well.
PC gaming is so different than console gaming at this point in terms of how games are released. You see a little bit of like the early access and the beta stuff on consoles, but not a whole lot. But it's kind of weird to think about so many of these games that we have on these lists. People have either already played a decent amount of, or the launches that we're talking about are not actually finished games. For example, Battlefield 1, a ton of people played that in beta a couple weeks ago. Gwent is launching in October as a beta. That's not the final game, but that's still going to be a big launch for them. Something else I think you just went through on the list, I forget what it was also like an early access launch or something. So a lot of these games...
Oh, Planet Coaster probably?
Planet Coaster has been in alpha or whatever they're calling it for a while now.
Yeah, I think they're calling it like playable pre-alpha or something.
So, people are already out there playing these games that you may be looking forward to, or when you get your hands on them, they might not actually be done. That's just the way the holiday season is these days. You never know what it's going to be.
It's definitely different. It feels like I don't know, except for Call of Duty and Battlefield and I guess like Watch Dogs, it doesn't feel like there are any, like, the blockbusters don't feel as blockbustery.
It's kind of an off year for franchises.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm trying to get at.
I mean, we don't have our usual Assassin's Creed. They took a break this year.
What am I going to do? That's how I mark my calendar every year.
You still got the Call of Duty there.
Assassin's Creed, you know how like the Chinese...
No Batman. Well, there's Batman Arkham VR. Is that coming to PC or is that PlayStation only?
It's PlayStation, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I was going to say, you know how like the Chinese calendar like starts sometime in like March? My calendar starts the day Assassin's Creed is released. Not because I'm an Assassin's Creed fan, just because it's so predictable. But this year... It's like the Mayan end of the world. You know, everyone thought like the world was going to end because our calendar ended. What do I do?
Well, you could stop showing up to work, I guess, if you think the world's ending. Just play Civ.
I guess that's the answer, isn't it? One more turn, guys. Just one more turn. Let's, as we're talking about this and going through the list a little bit more, let's also open it up to Twitch chat so you guys can, if you are excited for any games that we didn't mention yet, shout them out. Let me know. Tag us with @PCGamer in the Twitch chat, and we will read your comments. If you are a subscriber to the channel, of course, we're going to try to get to your comments first if we can. And as always, you're always welcome to join us live at twitch.tv/PCGamer Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific time. We usually, if you're looking just to do part of the Q&A, because I know it is a long show, you are always welcome to show up for the Q&A right around 2:15 Pacific time is when we usually try to hit that Q&A, 2:20 or 2:10, 2:15. So if you want to come ask us questions, come do it. And as I say that, Kunifu resubscribed for the seventh month in a row. We're almost getting to the point where we have like a year. That'll be crazy when we have someone who's subscribed for a year. We can't thank you enough. That's all I can say.
You could be the first.
Chris86 asks a complex question, but one I think is important to address of how do you decide on which games to review? And the truth of the matter is there's a lot of factors that go into it.
We asked Jared. He decides.
Yes. We say which one of these will benchmark the best.
I have zero input on game review. Let's just clarify that.
No, the answer is it's a bunch of different things. Honestly, we try to. I think one of the answers is we'd like to review as many games as we can, but time constraints and you know the number of bodies, the sheer amount of games that come out all put restrictions on that, and we try to prioritize things partly that like we know people are excited about and will want to see a review on
or interested in
interested
general,
in,
you know?
yeah.
If a game comes out on Steam and has just zero attention paid to it, you know, on the one hand, we like to try to call attention to games that fly under the radar, but a review is usually not the avenue we're going to take for that. Because if you see game name review for something you've never heard of, you're probably not going to click on that. Some people will, but most people will not say, oh, this is a thing I'm definitely interested in.
Yeah.
But if the headline or the way we cover the game is something more descriptive that tells you something about it, you know, right off the bat, you know, that compares it to another game, say, or calls out a feature that is noteworthy in that game, you're much more likely to, you know, get your attention, for that to grab your attention and click on that and want to find out about that game.
And I know there have been some comments actually in the new Steam Games post that we do every week about how like, oh, that's not enough. Like, if these games are worth calling out, like, why don't you review them? And it's like, well, like if we did that, we would be reviewing, you know, there are games that are interesting that I leave off of that list to try to keep it to 5. And even if we were just doing the 5 that I pull out every week, it's like 5 reviews every week is an insane amount of work. Like that is, even for short games, like that's a lot to do. And so we try to highlight these games in other ways and other ways that might not be so like detrimental to our workflow, basically, because we produce a lot of stuff on the site and we like getting a lot of stuff for you guys, and we have the magazine, and it's, you know, it's a lot to do. I hope that answered your question at least enough.
And if you're mad about something, blame Tyler.
Yes, blame Tyler. You can always send us emails. Remember, there's a little thing, an author card at the bottom of every article we write that should have our email, a link to our email, a link to our Twitter. If you'd like to see something, like obviously we can't guarantee just on a request, but if you think there's something that deserves coverage, let us know, because we try to stay in tune with as much as we possibly can, but there are always going to be things that you guys see that we don't. So hit us up. We rely on our community very, very much. Let's move on to a question from Kunifu. Going to EGX tomorrow, basically PAX UK. Which game should I queue up to play first? Gears of War 4, Titanfall 2, Dishonored 2, Call of Duty, or JCB Pioneer Mars? I don't know what that last one is, actually.
I don't either.
That's a good question, man. I would say...
What kind of games
do the last
do you
one
like?
and review it for us.
Jared has spoken.
Well
Must
played.
remove Pioneer Mars. Russ, review it.
I think... Out of these, I'd go Titanfall 2 because the others, except for the Pioneer game, which I don't know specifically about, the others are coming out in a month. So maybe either...
Isn't Titanfall out in... Is it November?
Titanfall out?
I think November, so slightly.
No way. I did not miss that, did I?
Or maybe December? It's this year, right?
Oh, God. Is
pretty
Titanfall
soon.
2 coming out that soon?
It's pretty soon.
Good Lord.
It's...
October. I totally just missed it.
It's strangely close to the release of Battlefield. EA is just putting out its two big games like a week apart.
Man, I'm just wrong then. Okay, so all of those games are coming out in the next couple months. I don't know then, because I thought Gears was really fun. If you have a chance to play Gears' Horde mode, which I didn't talk about, the Horde mode is a lot of fun, and you should try that if they're demoing it.
I think, preview the ones that you are... Maybe you're going to play all these games, so the order doesn't really matter. Preview the ones you're thinking about buying, probably.
Yeah.
The one that I would say I'm most personally interested in out of those is Dishonored 2. That's the one I expect to be kind of the game of the season. That game will probably win some accolades. It seems like it's shaping up to be as good or better than the first Dishonored, which was a great game, so...
All right, let's jump along. Scarfington is reposting the question from JBJ Blaze that was left earlier in the show. Question is dedicated to my mom, whose birthday was yesterday. Mine was actually 2 days prior, lucky us. So happy birthday to our longest subscriber,
the Blaze
JBJ.
family.
Yes, indeed. The Blaze family is so good. Oh, my God. She wanted two parents to help me make wiser decisions. Let's see. Do you guys think players who purchased Quantum Break from the Windows Store might get free keys for the Steam version? Overall, what's your take on this? I would say there's probably a snowball's chance in hell that they will give Steam keys to the Windows version owners. That being said, I think we talked about it a little while ago. Basically, I think it's nice that they brought it to Steam, and it's probably almost definitely a response to the game having a very, very rough reception in the Windows 10 version and just wanting more people to get a chance to play it, basically. I don't think it should really be seen as an indication of where Windows 10 games are going. If that continues to happen, where the game just is not selling at all on Windows 10 and then doing well when they sell it on Steam, maybe they'll change their minds about that. But I think that probably Quantum Break should be seen as like a little bit of a...
unusual case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
I hope it sells like hotcakes on Steam.
I hope so, too.
That would be awesome if it sells like 10 times, 20 times, 100 times as much as the Windows Store. Microsoft would be like, okay, maybe we need to just axe that stupid Windows Store. It's not going to happen, but I would not be sad if it did.
I think it's a really tough one to peer into the future on, because so much of the way those game releases work comes down to deals between developer and publisher and platform holder and all that stuff. So who knows what Remedy and Microsoft negotiated, what kind of exclusive deals they had, what kind of funding Microsoft provided for the game. And, there's so many just like boring legal elements at play there that we have zero insight into to really be able to say. I would not expect... They're not required, to do that. Like if you bought a copy of the game on the Windows Store, you bought a particular version of that software, that doesn't entitle you to the Steam version. So them giving you the Steam version would be a really nice, awesome thing to do. But, there's nothing that entitles people who bought one version of it to the other one.
Right. Let's see. Panzer 2 says, any word on the Battlefield 1 private servers? If they have official servers, if they only have official servers, I'll be so disappointed. I haven't heard any news on it yet.
No idea, yeah.
Did Battlefield Hardline have private servers?
I did not play Hardline.
Okay. Well, I'm no update on that, unfortunately, from us. He also says, I never noticed Yarny sitting up on that statue. Yeah. So for podcast listeners who can't see, we have a very, very large Yorm the Giant from Dark Souls 3 statue. And to make him less intimidating, I put a couple little Enter the Gungeon plushies by his feet, and I made Yarny riding his shoulders. You can't really see it on the video, but he's actually like holding the crown, holding on. It's pretty
Yarny's
adorable.
going for a ride.
Yarny is going for a ride. Let's see. Max Ursa, another subscriber, says, of course I'm playing Elite Dangerous, and the beta for 2.2 started yesterday. Anyone had a play of the beta yet? No, I don't think we have on this side of the ocean. I'm sure somebody, like probably Andy Kelly or someone in the UK, has jumped into it to try.
I think Andy's on vacation this week, which doesn't mean he hasn't played it.
Which means he did.
It just means we don't know.
Yeah.
But also, Chris Livingston on our side of the ocean has played a lot of Elite in the past, so we might see if he has any interest in jumping back in. So that's something we might cover in the next couple weeks.
Varendeel asks, it doesn't have a release date yet, so I don't think it's down officially, but I still think it's down officially as 2016. Mountain Blade Bannerlord, any more news on that? I don't think we have any specific news about it, but yeah, I think it is still listed for 2016, and it is still incredibly exciting. That game is a game we're absolutely going to be covering as it comes out and as we learn more about it, because man, that it just looks so cool. The sieges, I know we showed off the siege gameplay on an episode, I think around E3, and
they
God,
were
it's cool.
At the PC Gaming Show, right?
They were, yeah, real nice guys too. Excuse me. All right. There are a couple others. Verendale also said, looking at the list of big releases and AAA games coming up, the ones you mentioned, plus more sequels and prequels and annual releases, cookie-cutter FPSs, is big gaming running out of ideas at the same rate as Hollywood? I think yes, and that's never changed. Like, that's kind of... I think there's nothing special about this year, specifically about unoriginality. I think that no one is original anymore, and everything is a copy of something else. But I'm a pessimist, and I've believed that for a decade. So,
I mean, AAA gaming has continued to shrink in terms of number of releases as more and more people have been involved with the making of any Assassin's Creed or Watch Dogs or Battlefield. I don't think it's like a drastic change this year, but I expect that's probably a trend that will continue. You know, there was a time 10 years ago where EA put out dozens of games a year, and they do not release nearly as many games now as they once did, but they still have a ton of people who work for them as a company. So, you know, it takes a lot of people and a lot of hours to make those big games, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, that's one of the drawbacks of getting better and better graphics cards, right? Like when you just had little stupid sprites on the screen, you could have one or two man operations, but when it's like photorealistic graphics, you need photorealistic artists to come in and help make this stuff, and that's super complex. So that's why some of these, like all these indie titles that kind of break that mold, are cool to play and see, because they're doing things that PC games used to do, 20, 30 years ago before it became Hollywood big business.
All right, guys, I think that's all the time we have for today, though. Thank you very much for sending in your questions. There were a lot we couldn't get to, but we always appreciate them. So be sure to join us again next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific time, right here at twitch.tv/PCGamer, or on YouTube at youtube.com/PCGamer, or at PCGamer.com/podcast, or on iTunes. And there are so many ors. You can find us all over the place. Once again, also, you are welcome to send me an email with any of your comments at tom@PCGamer.com, or leave us a comment at PCGamer.com/podcast and go to this week's post and let us know in the comments below what you thought of us, if it's good or bad, or want to see something, or want us to review something, or whatever. We want to hear from you. We love it. We always love hearing from you. I've been Tom Marks with Wes Fenlon and Jared Walton. Gerald, you have so many W's and L's in your name, I can't even handle it.
Let's give the full name.
Yeah.
Jared Wayland Walter Walton.
As Chris Livingston said, Wayland Walter Walton sounds like a Superman villain. It really does.
Wayland Smithers.
Yeah, Wayland Smithers. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week, and we'll see you then.